The contraction tore through Emma Chen's body like a wave of fire, and she gripped the hospital bed's metal railing so hard her knuckles went white. Through the pain, she could hear the fetal monitor beeping steadily, her daughter's heartbeat, strong and insistent, demanding entry into a world that was about to become far more complicated than Emma had ever imagined. "Breathe through it," the nurse said, her hand cool against Emma's forehead. "You're doing great. Almost there. Almost there." Emma wanted to laugh at the bitter irony. She was almost at the finish line of a 9-month journey that had started with hope and was ending in a sterile labor room at Presbyterian Hospital. Alone. Except for a nurse she'd met 20 minutes ago. And a pain that made her previous suffering seem quaint by comparison. The door opened. Emma looked up, expecting her husband Marcus finally, after 3 hours of labor without him. Instead, she saw his attorney. Richard Morrison stood in the doorway of her labor room, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than the hospital bed Emma was lying in. He carried a leather briefcase and an expression that suggested he was delivering a package, not destroying someone's life. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his tone professionally neutral. "I apologize for the timing, but Dr. Chen insisted this couldn't wait." Emma felt another contraction building, but this pain was different, sharper, colder, radiating from her chest instead of her belly. What couldn't wait? Richard opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency and pulled out a manila envelope. "Dr. Chen has asked me to serve you with divorce papers." He felt it was important to formalize the separation before the child's birth to avoid any legal complications regarding custody arrangements. If you're already hooked on where this is going, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when Emma's true identity gets revealed. Now, back to the story. The words didn't make sense. Emma stared at the envelope, her mind struggling to process the information while her body struggled to bring new life into the world. "Divorce papers? I'm in labor. Richard. I'm literally in labor right now. I understand the timing is unfortunate, but Dr. Chen was quite clear about his wishes." Richard set the envelope on the tray table beside her bed, next to the cup of ice chips she'd been sucking on to keep her mouth from going dry. "He's asked that you review and sign these documents as soon as possible." Another contraction hit, and Emma couldn't suppress the cry that escaped her lips. The nurse, her name tag read, Patricia, shot Richard a look of pure fury. "You need to leave. Now. This woman is in active labor. I'm simply delivering documents at my client's request." Richard's tone never wavered from its professional detachment. "Miss Chen, you'll find the terms are quite generous considering the circumstances, Dr. Chen is willing to provide child support and limited visitation rights, though he's requesting full custody, to be revisited once the child is old enough for." "Get out." Emma's voice came out stronger than she expected, cutting through both Richard's explanation and the rising tide of another contraction. "Get out of my room right now." Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable, at least. He closed his briefcase with a soft click. "The documents are here when you're ready to review them. My contact information is on the cover letter." He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Chen, I did advise Dr. Chen that this approach was inadvisable. I'm sorry." After he left, Emma lay back against the pillows, her hands instinctively moving to her swollen belly, where her daughter was kicking with increasing urgency. 9 months ago, she'd told Marcus she was pregnant, and he'd lifted her off her feet, spinning her around their apartment's living room with joy so pure it had made her cry. Now he was serving her divorce papers while she labored to bring his child into the world. Patricia was checking the fetal monitor, her mouth set in a tight line of disapproval. That was unconscionable. "Do you want me to call someone for you? Family? A friend?" Emma shook her head. Her parents were dead, her mother from complications during childbirth 28 years ago, her father from a heart attack 3 years back. She had no siblings. The friends she'd had before marrying Marcus had drifted away during a marriage where her husband's surgical schedule took precedence over everything else, including her own needs. "I'm fine," she lied, reaching for the envelope with trembling hands. "Can you just give me a minute?" Patricia squeezed her shoulder with surprising gentleness. "I'll be right outside. You need anything at all, you press that call button." Alone in the labor room, Emma opened the envelope and pulled out the documents. The legal language was dense and technical, but certain phrases jumped out with devastating clarity. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. Petitioner requests sole custody. Respondent's fitness as a parent to be evaluated. Her fitness as a parent. Marcus was questioning whether she was fit to be a mother to the baby, currently trying to force her way out of Emma's body. The baby she'd carried for 9 months, while Marcus worked 16-hour days and came home smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers. Emma's hands shook as she flipped through the pages, and that's when she saw it. A photograph. Paper-clipped to the custody arrangement documents. Marcus and Dr. Vivian Park, his fellow surgeon, standing together in what looked like a hospital corridor. Vivian's hand rested on her own very pregnant belly, and Marcus's arm was around her shoulders. The date stamp on the photo was from 2 months ago, which meant Vivian was also 9 months pregnant, which meant Marcus had been sleeping with her for at least that long, probably longer. Emma thought about the nights she'd waited up for Marcus, the dinners that had grown cold on the table, the weekend shifts he'd claimed were mandatory. She thought about the way he'd stopped touching her once her belly started showing, claiming he didn't want to hurt the baby. She thought about how stupid she'd been to believe that a brilliant surgeon like Marcus Chen would stay interested in a woman whose only accomplishment was hiding from her own identity. Because that's what she'd been doing for the past 5 years. Hiding. Emma Sullivan, daughter of pharmaceutical billionaire Richard Sullivan, had become Emma Chen, unremarkable wife of a remarkable doctor. She'd told Marcus her parents were dead but never mentioned the $2 billion empire her father had built from nothing. She'd let him believe she was nobody special, just a woman lucky enough to catch his attention. Now he was discarding her like a failed experiment, and she had no one to blame but herself. Another contraction hit harder this time, lasting longer. Emma pressed the call button, and Patricia was back in seconds. "Contractions are getting closer together," Patricia said, checking the monitor. "About 3 minutes apart now. Let me page Dr. Morrison." "Not Dr. Chen?" Emma asked through gritted teeth. Patricia's expression darkened. "Dr. Chen specifically requested that Dr. Morrison handle your delivery. He said he had a conflict of interest." A conflict of interest. His pregnant mistress was probably in labor down the hall, and he'd chosen to be with her instead of his wife. The door opened again, but this time a different man entered. Dr. James Sullivan was younger than Emma expected, maybe 40, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that seemed to see straight through to all the secrets she'd been keeping. He wore surgical scrubs and an expression of carefully controlled anger. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice gentler than his expression. "I'm Dr. Sullivan. I'll be delivering your baby tonight." Emma stared at him. Sullivan. Her father's name. But it was a common enough surname, probably just a coincidence. "Dr. Chen won't be attending the birth?" She already knew the answer, but needed to hear it confirmed. "Dr. Chen is currently attending to another patient in the maternity ward." James's jaw tightened. "I apologize for the situation. Let's focus on getting your daughter safely into the world." He examined her with professional efficiency, and when he looked up, his expression was grave. "You're at 8 centimeters. We're close, but I'm seeing some concerning patterns in the baby's heart rate. Nothing critical yet, but we need to monitor closely." Emma felt fear cut through her anger and humiliation. "Is she okay?" "She's a fighter." James smiled, and something in that smile felt familiar in a way Emma couldn't place. "Just like her mother, I suspect." Over the next hour, the contractions intensified until Emma couldn't think about anything except the overwhelming pressure and the desperate need to push. Patricia coached her through breathing exercises while James monitored the equipment with increasing focus. "Emma," he said, and she noticed he'd dropped the formal Mrs. Chen. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your daughter's heart rate is dropping. We need to get her out now." "What does that mean?" "It means you're going to push when I tell you to push, and you're going to give me everything you've got." His hand found hers, warm and steady. "Can you do that?" Emma nodded, unable to speak past the fear clogging her throat. Good. On the next contraction, I need you to push as hard as you can. Patricia's going to help you. The next minutes dissolved into a blur of pain and effort, and Patricia's voice counting and James's steady commands. Emma pushed until she thought she might split apart, pushed until the world narrowed to nothing but the desperate need to bring her daughter safely into the world. I can see her head, Patricia said, her voice high with excitement. Emma, she's right there. One more big push. Emma bore down with everything she had left, feeling something shift and give. And then suddenly, miraculously, the pressure released and she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her daughter's first cry. She's here, James said, his voice rough with emotion Emma didn't understand. She's perfect. Through tears, Emma watched as James lifted her daughter small and red-faced and screaming with outrage at being forced from her warm cocoon. He placed the baby on Emma's chest, skin to skin, and Emma felt something crack open in her heart. Hello, Sophia? She whispered, the name coming to her lips automatically. Sophia Sullivan, after her grandmother who died bringing Emma's father into the world. I'm your mama, and I promise you'll never feel unwanted like this again. James was cutting the umbilical cord, his hand steady, despite something flickering in his expression. Sophia's a beautiful name. Was that your mother's name? Emma looked up sharply. How did you know that? Because, James began, but he was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, someone crying, the sound of rushing footsteps. The door burst open. Marcus stood there, still in his surgical scrubs, his face flushed with either exertion or fury. Behind him, Patricia was protesting loudly about unauthorized visitors. Emma, we need to talk, Marcus said, not even glancing at the newborn baby on his wife's chest. Vivian's in premature labor. There are complications. I need you to sign those papers right now, so I can focus on what matters. What matters? Not their daughter, who was barely 5 minutes old. Not Emma, who'd just been through labor alone. What mattered to Marcus was the other woman carrying his other child. Emma held Sophia closer, feeling a coldness settle over her that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Get out, Marcus. Don't be difficult. This situation is complicated enough without your drama. He crossed the room, reaching for the divorce papers still sitting on the tray table. Just sign them. You'll get child support, visitation with supervision, and... James stepped between Marcus and the bed with surprising speed. Dr. Chen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Your presence is causing the patient distress, which is medically inadvisable in the immediate postpartum period. This is none of your business, Sullivan. I'm her husband. You're the man who just served his wife with divorce papers while she was in active labor. James's voice was quiet but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Security is already on their way. You can leave voluntarily. Or you can be escorted out. Your choice. Marcus looked between them, his expression calculating. Fine. But Emma, you need to understand Vivian needs me. Her pregnancy is high risk, and she doesn't have anyone else. Unlike you, who apparently has Dr. Sullivan here playing hero. After Marcus left, Emma realized she was shaking. Sophia had stopped crying and was staring up at her with unfocused newborn eyes, seemingly unaware that her father had just chosen someone else over meeting her. I'm sorry you had to see that, James said quietly. He'd returned to checking Emma's vitals, but his movements were tense with suppressed anger. It's not your fault. Emma looked down at her daughter, memorizing every detail of her tiny face. James, Dr. Sullivan, can I ask you something? Anything. When you came in tonight, you knew my maiden name, didn't you? You knew I was Emma Sullivan before I married Marcus. James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. I've been looking for you for 3 years, Emma. Ever since your father died and left specific instructions in his will. Instructions that couldn't be executed until certain conditions were met. Emma's heart stopped. What conditions? Until you gave birth to a child. James pulled a folder from the nurse's station cabinet, a folder Emma realized had been waiting there all along. Your father knew there was a chance you might hide from your inheritance the way your grandmother did after your mother died. So he created a trust with very specific terms. He opened the folder, and Emma saw documents bearing her father's law firm's letterhead. Documents dated 3 years ago, shortly before the heart attack that had killed him. Emma Sullivan Chen, you are the sole heir to Sullivan Pharmaceuticals and all associated assets. Current estimated value, $2.3 billion. James's voice was gentle as he delivered information that rewrote her entire reality. The trust activates automatically upon the birth of your first child. And I'm the executor your father appointed, to make sure you received your inheritance and to make sure no one could manipulate you into signing it away. Emma stared at the documents, her mind reeling. $2 billion. Give or take a few $100 million, depending on market fluctuations. James smiled slightly. Your father wanted to make sure you and any children you had would be protected. He knew you'd run away from the family business. But he hoped that becoming a mother might change your perspective on legacy and responsibility. Sophia chose that moment to yawn, her tiny mouth opening wide before she settled more comfortably against Emma's chest. Emma looked down at her daughter and thought about Marcus in the hallway with his pregnant mistress, thought about the divorce papers that questioned her fitness as a mother, thought about the man who'd thrown her away because he had no idea who she really was. James, she said slowly, does Marcus know about this? No one knows, except the trust attorneys, myself. And now you. James pulled up a chair beside the bed. Your father was very clear. The inheritance was to be revealed only to you, and only after you'd given birth. He wanted to make sure that whoever was in your life chose to be there for you, not for your money. Emma felt something cold and hard crystallizing in her chest. Marcus had failed that test spectacularly. What happens now? She asked. Now? James's smile turned predatory in a way that reminded Emma suddenly of her father in the boardroom. Now you decide what kind of life you want to build for your daughter, and whether the man who served you with divorce papers in a labor room deserves to be part of that life. Through the walls, Emma could hear Vivian screaming. Another woman in labor, another woman who thought Marcus Chen was worth fighting for. Neither of them knew yet that the game had just changed completely. Emma looked at the divorce papers, then at the trust documents, then at her daughter sleeping peacefully against her heart. Marcus had wanted her to sign away her rights while she was at her most vulnerable, while she had nothing and no one. But Emma Sullivan Chen wasn't nothing anymore. She was her father's daughter. And Marcus Chen had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The hours after Sophia's birth blurred together in a haze of nurses checking vitals, lactation consultants offering guidance, and the strange, disorienting feeling of holding a whole new person who hadn't existed outside her body just hours ago. Emma floated through it all with a kind of detached clarity, hyper-aware that her life had fractured into two distinct timelines, before she knew about the inheritance and after. James had left the trust documents with her, contained in a leather portfolio embossed with her father's initials. He'd promised to return in the morning to discuss details. But first Emma needed to rest, needed to process, needed to let her body recover from the trauma of bringing life into the world while her marriage died in real time. She couldn't rest, though. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face when he'd burst into the delivery room not looking at his newborn daughter, but demanding signatures on divorce papers so he could run back to Vivian. The memory burned like acid. Patricia had been replaced by a night nurse named Rosa, an older woman with kind eyes and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who'd seen everything the maternity ward could offer. She adjusted Sophia's bassinet beside Emma's bed and checked the IV fluids with practiced efficiency. "How are we feeling, Mama?" Rosa asked, her accent carrying hints of her native Puerto Rico. "Any excessive bleeding? Cramping beyond normal?" "I'm fine," Emma said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, I don't know what normal is supposed to feel like. Normal is everything hurting, and being terrified you're going to break your baby every time you pick her up." Rosa smiled, the expression warm and knowing. "But you won't break her. She's tougher than she looks, just like her mama." Emma looked down at Sophia, who was sleeping with her tiny fists curled beside her face. She had a surprising amount of dark hair for a newborn, and when she'd opened her eyes earlier, Emma had seen they were hazel, not Marcus's dark brown, but something closer to Emma's own changeable green gold. "Rosa," Emma said quietly, "the man who came in earlier, Dr. Chen, has he been back?" Rosa's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Chen is currently with another patient in the maternity ward. Room 847, if you're curious. Room 847. Just down the hall." Close enough that Emma could hear the occasional cry of pain through the walls, though the sound was muffled enough that she might have imagined it. "The other patient," Emma said carefully. "Is she also in labor?" Rosa was silent for a moment, clearly weighing her professional obligations against her obvious sympathy for Emma's situation. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but honey, you deserve to know what you're dealing with, Doctor. Vivian Park was admitted 4 hours ago, with premature labor at 37 weeks. She's having complications, placental abruption. They're prepping her for emergency C-section." Emma felt something twist in her chest. Not quite sympathy, but not quite satisfaction either. Vivian was a person, after all, not just a homewrecker. And her baby, Marcus's baby, didn't deserve to suffer for the sins of its parents. "Will she be okay?" Emma asked. "The doctors are optimistic, but it's serious." Rosa finished her checks and moved toward the door. "Try to get some rest, Emma. You've been through enough tonight without worrying about people who clearly weren't worrying about you." After Rosa left, Emma reached for the leather portfolio James had left behind. Inside, she found documents that rewrote her understanding of everything her father had built. Sullivan Pharmaceuticals wasn't just a company, it was an empire spanning 3 continents, with research facilities developing treatments for diseases that killed millions. Patents worth hundreds of millions, real estate holdings that included the very hospital where Emma now lay. Presbyterian Hospital was owned by Sullivan Medical Properties, a subsidiary of her father's trust. Emma sat up straighter, ignoring the protest from her exhausted body. She owned this hospital, which meant she owned the building where Marcus worked, where he performed his surgeries, where he'd built his reputation as one of the country's leading cardiovascular surgeons. The door opened quietly. James entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing civilian clothes, now jeans, and a dark sweater that made him look less like a doctor and more like someone's protective older brother. "I know visiting hours are over," he said, offering her one of the cups. "But I called in a favor with Rosa. Thought you might need someone to talk to who isn't checking your cervix." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully, even though she wasn't supposed to have caffeine while breastfeeding. 1 cup wouldn't hurt, and she needed something to ground her in reality. "How long have you known my father?" James settled into the chair beside her bed. "Your father and mine were friends from medical school. Richard Sullivan was my godfather, actually. When he realized he was sick and you disappeared from the family business, he asked me to look after his interests until you were ready to claim them." 3 years, Emma said. "You've been waiting 3 years for me to have a baby?" "I've been waiting 3 years to make sure you were protected." James took a sip of his coffee. "Your father knew you'd run away from the pharmaceutical empire. He understood why your mother died in childbirth, your grandmother became a recluse afterward, and you grew up surrounded by people who only saw dollar signs when they looked at you. But he also knew that having a child changes your perspective, makes you think about legacy differently." Emma looked at Sophia sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fortune she'd just inherited by being born. He was right. "Everything looks different now." "Different how?" "Marcus served me with divorce papers in the delivery room because he thought I was nobody. Just some woman who got lucky enough to marry above her station." Emma's voice was calm, but underneath she felt something cold and hard forming. "He's down the hall right now with his pregnant mistress, probably planning the life they'll build together with the child support he graciously offered me." James was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do about it?" Emma thought about the question. What did she want? Revenge seemed too simple, too base. Justice felt closer to the truth. Marcus had made assumptions about who she was and what she was worth. He discarded her at her most vulnerable moment, because he thought she had no power, no resources, no ability to fight back. "I want him to know," she said finally. "I want Marcus to understand exactly who he divorced. But more than that, I want to make sure Sophia never experiences what I experienced tonight. I want to build something so strong, so unshakable, that she'll never be vulnerable the way I was. Your father would be proud." James smiled. "He said almost the exact same thing when you were born. I'm going to build something so powerful that my daughter will never need anyone's permission to be extraordinary." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. She'd been so angry at her father for dying, for leaving her alone with an empire she didn't want. But he'd known. Somehow, he'd known she would need this safety net eventually. "Tell me about the trust," she said, pushing the emotion aside. "What are the actual terms?" James pulled out a tablet from his bag and brought up documents. "Sullivan Pharmaceuticals generates approximately $800 million in annual revenue. The company is run by a board of directors. Your father hand-selected, all extremely competent, all loyal to his vision. They've been waiting for you to take your seat as chairman." "Chairman," Emma repeated. "I'm a chairman of an $8 billion pharmaceutical company, and I've been living in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, working part-time at a museum gift shop." $2.3 billion, James corrected gently. "And yes, the contrast is rather stark. But Emma, you don't have to do anything immediately. The board can continue running operations while you recover, while you adjust to being a mother. Take all the time you need." Emma shook her head. "No. I've been hiding for 5 years, pretending to be someone I'm not because I thought that's what it took to be loved. Marcus just showed me exactly how well that strategy worked out." She reached for the tablet, scrolling through financial statements and board meeting minutes. Her father's company had thrived without her, but there were opportunities he'd marked in his notes: expansions into gene therapy, partnerships with research universities, acquisitions of smaller biotech firms that had promising patents. "There's something else," James said, his tone shifting. "Sullivan Medical Properties owns this hospital, as you've probably figured out. But we also own 2 others in the tri-state area, including Manhattan General, where Marcus trained. Your father believed in vertical integration, owned the research facilities, owned the manufacturing plants, owned the hospitals where the treatments are administered." Emma looked up sharply. "Marcus doesn't know Sullivan Pharmaceuticals owns Presbyterian Hospital. No one knows, except the board and the senior hospital administrators. We operate through shell companies and holding corporations. It's good business practice, but it also means you have leverage that Marcus can't possibly anticipate." A knock interrupted them. Rosa poked her head in, her expression troubled. "Emma, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Dr. Chen is asking to see you. He says it's urgent." Emma glanced at James, who gave a slight nod. "Let him in." "But I'm staying." Marcus entered looking haggard in a way Emma had rarely seen. His surgical scrubs were rumpled, his hair disheveled, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and exhaustion. He barely glanced at Sophia in her bassinet before focusing on Emma. "Vivian had the baby," he said without preamble. "A boy. 7 weeks premature, but he's stable. They're both going to be okay." "I'm glad," Emma said, and meant it. Whatever else was happening, a baby's safe arrival was something to celebrate. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he'd expected a different reaction. "I need to talk to you about the custody arrangement. I know the timing of the divorce papers was poorly chosen, but we need to establish some ground rules for Sophia's care." "Ground rules," Emma repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "I think it's best if we agree to a shared custody arrangement with primary residence alternating by week. I'll take Sophia on my weeks off. You'll have her when I'm working. It's the most logical division." James made a noise that might have been a laugh or a cough. Marcus finally seemed to notice his presence. "Dr. Sullivan, this is a private family matter." "Actually, Dr. Chen, Dr. Sullivan is my attorney," Emma said smoothly. "Anything you want to discuss regarding custody should probably go through proper legal channels." Marcus's expression shifted from exhaustion to irritation. "Your attorney? Emma, you can't afford an attorney. You work part-time at a museum. That's why I was being generous with the settlement offer, so you'd have resources to care for our daughter. How generous of you, Emma said, her tone pleasant despite the fury building in her chest. Tell me, Marcus, this shared custody arrangement, would Sophia be staying with you and Vivian during your weeks? Would your newborn son and my newborn daughter be raised as siblings? Marcus had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's premature to discuss. Vivian and I haven't made any firm decisions about our living situation. But you've made firm decisions about divorcing me while I was in labor. About serving me papers before you'd even met your daughter. Emma's voice remained calm, but steel had entered it, her father's steel. The voice he'd used in boardrooms when making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Tell me, Marcus, when exactly did you decide I wasn't worth keeping? Emma, this isn't productive. Was it when I started showing? When my belly got too big to hide? When I stopped looking like the trophy wife you could show off at hospital galas? Emma leaned forward slightly, mindful of her surgical incisions. Or was it when Vivian told you she was pregnant and you realized you could trade up to a younger model who also happens to be a surgeon? Someone who understands your world better than a museum clerk ever could. Marcus's jaw tightened. You're being emotional. This is exactly why I wanted to handle this rationally, with legal documentation rather than dramatics. Emotional, Emma repeated. I gave birth to your daughter 3 hours ago, Marcus. You served me with divorce papers while I was at 8 centimeters dilated. I think I'm entitled to be a little emotional. Look, I know this is hard for you to understand, but sometimes people grow apart. We want different things from life. You wanted a quiet domestic existence, and I need someone who can match my ambitions, someone who pushes me to be better. Marcus glanced at Sophia, still without any visible affection. We can co-parent successfully without being married. Plenty of people do it. James stood up, his movement deliberate. Dr. Chen, I think it's time for you to leave. Mrs. Chen needs rest, and this conversation can continue through appropriate legal channels. I'm talking to my wife. Your soon-to-be ex-wife, who you're harassing in her hospital room mere hours after giving birth. James corrected. Security can escort you out, if necessary. Marcus looked between them, his expression calculating. Emma could see him trying to figure out why a random OBGYN was acting as her attorney, why she seemed less devastated than he'd clearly expected. Fine, Marcus said finally. But Emma, you need to be realistic about your situation. You have no income, no family support, and a newborn who's going to be expensive. My settlement offer is more than fair. Don't let pride make you do something stupid. After he left, Emma felt the calm facade crack slightly. Her hands were shaking, and she realized she'd been holding Sophia without meaning to, had picked her up from the bassinet at some point during the conversation, and was clutching her daughter like a shield. Breathe, James said gently, sitting back down. You did beautifully. Didn't give away anything, didn't lose your temper, didn't show him any cards we're holding. He has no idea, does he? Emma looked down at Sophia, who was making small sucking motions in her sleep. He genuinely thinks I'm helpless, which gives us a significant tactical advantage. James pulled up more documents on his tablet. Emma, I need to tell you something else. Something your father discovered before he died. What? Presbyterian Hospital's board of directors has been considering offering Dr. Marcus Chen the position of Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery. It's a promotion he's been working toward for years. Substantial pay increase, equity stake in the hospital, leadership role that would cement his reputation. James paused. The board was planning to vote on his appointment next week. Emma felt a cold smile form on her lips. But the board reports to Sullivan Medical Properties, which reports to the trust, which is controlled by you, as of tonight. James's expression matched hers. You're the majority shareholder, Emma, which means you have final approval over all major personnel decisions. So Marcus has been working toward a promotion that requires my approval, and he doesn't even know it. Exactly, and there's more. James swiped through more documents. Dr. Vivian Park is also employed by Presbyterian Hospital. Her position as a surgical resident is contingent on maintaining good standing with hospital administration, which means no scandals, no ethical violations, no conduct unbecoming a medical professional. Emma thought about the photograph in the divorce papers, Marcus and Vivian together, both married to other people at the time, both engaged in an affair that had resulted in 2 pregnancies, timed almost identically. Hospital ethics policies typically forbid relationships between attending physicians and residents under their supervision, she said slowly, remembering the paperwork she'd had to sign when Marcus first joined the hospital staff years ago. They do indeed. Marcus is Vivian's supervising physician, which means their relationship represents a serious ethical violation, the kind that could result in termination for both of them. James's smile was sharp. Your father kept very careful records. He suspected something was happening but died before he could intervene. Those records are now yours. Emma looked at her daughter, thinking about the future she wanted to build. A future where Sophia grew up knowing her worth, where she never had to hide from her own power, where the men in her life earned the privilege of being there rather than assuming it as their right. Marcus thought he was divorcing a nobody. He thought he was getting rid of an inconvenient wife so he could build a new life with his brilliant surgical paramour. He had no idea he'd just handed his career, his reputation, and his future to the woman he'd underestimated so catastrophically. James, Emma said quietly, I think it's time we had a conversation with the hospital's board of directors. And I think we should start by reviewing their policies on professional conduct and ethical standards. Outside her window, dawn was beginning to break over Manhattan. The city was waking up. Millions of people starting their days with no idea that in a hospital room overlooking the East River, a woman who'd been nobody hours ago was becoming someone who would change everything. Marcus Chen thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully discarded one woman for a better model. But Emma Sullivan had just been born again, and this time, she knew exactly who she was. Emma woke to the sound of Sophia crying, a thin, reedy wail that sent her body into immediate alert despite having slept only 90 minutes. Every muscle ached as she shifted in the hospital bed, her abdomen protesting the movement with sharp reminders of what it had been through just 6 hours ago. I've got you, sweet girl, she murmured, lifting Sophia from the bassinet with careful hands. Her daughter's face was scrunched and red with indignation, tiny fists waving in the air like she was ready to fight the world that had so rudely interrupted her sleep. The door opened quietly. A young woman in professional attire entered, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of careful neutrality. She was Asian, mid-30s, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent had been. Mrs. Chen, I'm Karen Wu, hospital administrator. She glanced at Sophia, now latched onto Emma's breast and nursing with single-minded determination. I apologize for the early intrusion. But Dr. Sullivan said you wanted to meet with senior staff this morning. Emma blinked away the fog of exhaustion. James had clearly moved fast. What time is it? 6:30. I know it's early, but Dr. Sullivan was quite insistent that certain matters required immediate attention. Karen's tone was professional, but Emma caught the curiosity underneath. The hospital administrator was wondering why a random OBGYN was making demands on behalf of a patient. Give me 10 minutes to finish feeding her, Emma said. And could you please ask James Dr. Sullivan to join us? After Karen left, Emma looked down at Sophia and felt the surreal disconnect between her two realities. In this room, she was just a new mother, exhausted and overwhelmed, trying to figure out which end of the baby to burp. But somewhere in the hospital's administrative offices, documents were being reviewed that would reveal her as the owner of the entire building. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. This is David Harrison, senior partner at Harrison & Associates. Dr. Sullivan gave me your contact information. I represent Sullivan Pharmaceuticals' interests. We need to meet at your earliest convenience. Emma stared at the message. Her father's law firm. Of course, James would have contacted them immediately after the trust activated. They'd probably been waiting 3 years for this exact moment. She typed back with one hand while Sophia nursed with the other. How soon can you get to Presbyterian Hospital? The response came within seconds. I'm in the lobby. Dr. Sullivan briefed me last night. While Emma had been processing the dissolution of her marriage and the shock of her inheritance, James had been assembling her team. She didn't know whether to be grateful or unsettled by his efficiency. When Sophia finished eating, Emma burped her carefully and changed her diaper, a process that still felt terrifyingly unfamiliar despite the lactation consultant's patient instruction hours earlier. Her daughter was so small, so fragile, with skin like paper and bones that felt like they might break if Emma held her wrong. "You're tougher than you look," she whispered, echoing Rose's words. "You have to be. You're a Sullivan now." James arrived with David Harrison in tow. The attorney was exactly what Emma expected: silver-haired, expensively suited, with the kind of calm authority that came from decades managing billion-dollar estates. He shook Emma's hand with surprising gentleness, mindful of her postpartum state. "Mrs. Chen, or should I say Miss Sullivan?" David's smile was kind. "Your father spoke of you often. He'd be incredibly proud of how you've handled the last 12 hours. I haven't done anything yet except give birth and get divorced," Emma said dryly. "Sometimes survival is the most radical act." David settled into a chair, pulling out a leather portfolio that looked identical to the one James had brought. "I've been managing your father's estate for 3 years, waiting for this day. Let me walk you through what you now control." Over the next 30 minutes, while Sophia slept in her bassinet and Karen Wu took discreet notes, David laid out an empire Emma had only glimpsed through her father's documents. Sullivan Pharmaceuticals was the crown jewel, but the holdings extended far beyond. Real estate in Manhattan, Boston, and San Francisco. A venture capital fund specializing in biotech startups, a charitable foundation that funded medical research at universities across the country. The trust generates approximately $3.2 million monthly in passive income, David said, his tone suggesting this was a modest sum. "Your father lived simply and reinvested aggressively. Everything he built was designed to compound over time." $3 million a month, Emma repeated numbly. She'd been living on Marcus's salary, comfortable, but not extravagant. They'd argued about money occasionally, mostly about Emma's insistence on contributing financially despite Marcus's protests that he could provide for both of them. All that time, she could have bought the building they lived in without affecting her monthly cash flow. Karen Wu cleared her throat delicately. "Miss Sullivan, I feel I should mention that I've been the hospital administrator for 6 years. I've known you were the beneficial owner of Presbyterian Hospital for approximately 45 minutes. She glanced at David. "Mr. Harrison's office contacted me at 5 this morning. I apologize for the shock," Emma said. "I only learned about the inheritance myself last night." "Understood. But I think you should know that, Dr. Chen, your husband has been advocating strongly for his promotion to Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery. The board was scheduled to vote on his appointment this Friday." Karen's expression remained neutral, but Emma heard the unspoken question. "What do you want me to do about it?" Emma looked at James, who nodded slightly. "What does such a promotion entail?" "Substantial salary increase from $450,000 to $750,000 annually. Equity stake in the hospital's surgical division, which would vest over 5 years. Leadership role overseeing 15 surgeons and residents. And most significantly, a seat on the hospital's medical board, which advises administration on policy and hiring decisions." Emma thought about Marcus bursting into her delivery room, not to meet his daughter, but to demand she sign divorce papers immediately. Thought about him calling Vivian what matters. Thought about the settlement offer that treated Emma like a charity case who should be grateful for his generosity. "I want the promotion suspended, pending a review of Dr. Chen's professional conduct," Emma said quietly. Karen's eyebrows rose. "On what grounds?" "Dr. Chen is engaged in a romantic relationship with Dr. Vivian Park, a surgical resident under his direct supervision. That violates hospital ethics policy regarding supervisor-subordinate relationships." Emma kept her voice steady despite the anger simmering underneath. "I believe you'll find extensive documentation of their relationship, including the fact that they're both currently in your maternity ward with newborns conceived. While Dr. Chen was married to me and Dr. Park was married to someone else." "Jesus," Karen muttered, then caught herself. "I apologize, but yes, that would absolutely constitute grounds for an ethics review." Relationships between attending physicians and residents are strictly forbidden. The power imbalance creates liability issues for the hospital. David was making notes on his tablet. I assume Dr. Park's residency contract includes morality clauses. Standard for all residents, Karen confirmed. Any conduct that brings disrepute to the hospital or violates professional standards can result in contract termination. Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. She wasn't trying to destroy Marcus and Vivian, she was simply ensuring they faced the consequences of choices they'd made freely. But the power she suddenly wielded was staggering in its scope. I don't want them fired, she said carefully. Not immediately. I want a formal investigation conducted according to proper protocols. If they violated hospital policy, there should be appropriate consequences. But I won't use my position to exact personal revenge. James smiled slightly. That's very principled of you. It's what my father would have done, Emma replied. He believed in justice, not vengeance. A knock interrupted them. Rosa entered, looking apologetic. Emma, I'm sorry, but Dr. Chen is outside requesting to see you again. He says it's about the baby's care plan. Emma glanced at Sophia, sleeping peacefully, despite the machinations swirling around her tiny existence. Let him in, but everyone stays. Marcus entered looking marginally more put together than his previous visit. He'd changed into clean scrubs and run a comb through his hair. But he stopped short when he saw the room full of people in business attire, surrounding Emma's hospital bed. What's going on here? His tone was sharp with suspicion. Just meeting with some advisors about Sophia's future, Emma said pleasantly. Marcus, you remember the divorce papers you served me yesterday? Of course, but I've decided not to sign them. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean, you've decided not to sign them? Emma, we discussed this. The marriage is over. You discussed it. You made a unilateral decision and expected me to comply. Emma adjusted her position carefully, mindful of her incisions. But I've had some time to think, and I've decided that any divorce settlement should be negotiated through proper legal channels with full disclosure of all assets and income. Marcus's jaw tightened. There's nothing to disclose. My income is public record. I'm a hospital employee. Our assets are minimal. This is a straightforward dissolution. Is it? David Harrison spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who dismantled stronger men in courtrooms. Dr. Chen, I'm David Harrison, Miss Sullivan's attorney. I represent her interests in this matter. And I have to say, your proposed settlement seems to significantly undervalue your wife's contributions to the marriage. Her contributions. Marcus laughed, the sound bitter. Emma worked part-time at a museum gift shop. I paid for everything, the apartment, the food, the utilities. She contributed exactly nothing financially. Actually, Dr. Chen, during your marriage, Miss Sullivan was the beneficial owner of assets valued at over $2 billion. David's tone remained pleasant, conversational, as he delivered the information that drained all color from Marcus's face. Assets that under New York law would be considered separate property, but which nonetheless significantly alter the financial calculus of any divorce settlement. Marcus looked between David and Emma, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. $2 billion. That's impossible. Emma's parents were dead. She had no money when we married. My father died 3 years ago, Emma said quietly. He left his estate in a trust that activated upon the birth of my first child. As of last night at 11:47 p.m., when Sophia was born, I became the sole heir to Sullivan Pharmaceuticals and all associated holdings. Sullivan Pharmaceuticals. Marcus's voice came out strangled. The company that owns this hospital. Among other properties, yes. Emma met his eyes steadily. The hospital where you work, Marcus. The hospital where you were hoping to be promoted to Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery this Friday. Understanding crashed over Marcus's face like a wave. Emma watched him process the implications. She owned the hospital, controlled his career trajectory, held all the power he'd assumed belonged to him. You can't, he started, then stopped. This is a conflict of interest. You can't use your position to retaliate against me professionally. I'm not retaliating, Emma said calmly. I'm simply ensuring that all hospital employees are held to the same ethical standards, including attending physicians who engage in inappropriate relationships with residents under their supervision. Marcus went very still. You wouldn't. I already have, Karen Wu interjected, her voice professionally neutral. An ethics investigation was initiated this morning into allegations of supervisor-subordinate fraternization between you and Dr. Park. You'll both be receiving formal notification within the hour. This is insane. Marcus's composure was cracking. Emma, you're upset about the divorce. I understand that. But you can't destroy my career because your feelings are hurt. My feelings aren't hurt, Marcus. I'm devastated. There's a difference. Emma felt tears threaten but pushed them back. You served me with divorce papers while I was in labor. You questioned my fitness as a mother. You offered me child support and supervised visitation as if I were some unstable stranger you needed to be protected from. And all of this happened because you assumed I was powerless. She gestured to the documents spread across her bed. I'm not powerless. I never was. I just chose to hide who I really was because I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my family's money. You failed that test, Marcus, spectacularly. Marcus looked around the room at the faces, staring back at him. James's quiet satisfaction, David's professional assessment, Karen's carefully controlled sympathy. His world was rewriting itself in real time, and Emma could see him scrambling to find purchase in the new reality. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. I want you to be a good father to Sophia, Emma said simply. I want you to face the consequences of your professional misconduct. And I want you to understand that the woman you thought you married doesn't exist. She never did. Before Marcus could respond, another knock sounded. A different nurse poked her head in, looking stressed. Dr. Chen, Dr. Park is asking for you. The baby's having some breathing difficulties. Nothing critical, but the NICU wants you present. Marcus looked torn clearly, wanting to continue this conversation, but unable to ignore the summons regarding his other newborn child. Finally, he turned to Emma one more time. This isn't over, he said. No, Emma agreed. It's just beginning. After he left, the room released a collective breath. David closed his portfolio with a satisfied snap. That went rather well, I think. He looked like I'd hit him with a truck, Emma said weakly. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. James moved to check her vitals with practiced efficiency. Your blood pressure is elevated, which is understandable given the circumstances. But, Emma, you need to rest. Your body just went through significant trauma. I can't rest. There's too much to do. But even as she said it, Emma felt her eyelids drooping. The empire will still be there in 6 hours, David said gently. Your father built it to last. A few hours of sleep won't change anything except your ability to function. Karen stood, gathering her tablet. I'll initiate the ethics investigation through proper channels. Everything will be documented and handled according to hospital protocol. You have my word. After they left, Emma was alone with James and Sophia. Her daughter had woken and was making small sounds of distress, her face scrunching up in preparation for a full-scale meltdown. She's hungry again, Emma said, reaching for her. They eat every 2 hours at this stage. They do indeed. James helped her get settled. His movements, gentle and practiced. You're doing remarkably well for someone who gave birth less than 12 hours ago and inherited a fortune in the same night. Emma looked down at Sophia, who'd latched on and was nursing with the same fierce determination she'd shown from birth. James, can I ask you something? Anything. My father, did he know? Did he know Marcus would do something like this? James was quiet for a long moment. Richard didn't know specifics, but he knew that hiding your identity was a test. He knew that whoever you married would eventually reveal their true character when they thought you had nothing. He just hoped we all hoped that you'd chosen someone who would pass that test. I chose wrong. You chose based on incomplete information. Marcus chose to be cruel when he thought you were powerless. That's on him, not you. James settled back into his chair. But Emma, I need to ask, what are you planning to do? Are you going to fight the divorce? Try to repair the marriage? Emma thought about Marcus's face when he'd burst into the delivery room, about the way he'd looked at Vivian in that photograph, about the life he was already planning with someone else. No, she said quietly. The marriage is over. He killed it when he chose her over us. But I'm going to make sure the divorce happens on my terms, not his. And I'm going to make sure that Sophia grows up knowing her father, even if he doesn't deserve her. That's remarkably gracious. It's self-preservation. Emma stroked Sophia's downy hair. If I let rage consume me, it'll poison everything I'm trying to build. My father understood that. He always said the best revenge was building something so extraordinary that your enemies became irrelevant. James smiled. Richard used to say that exact phrase in board meetings. Through the window, Manhattan was fully awake. Now the city where Emma's father had built his empire, where she'd hidden from her inheritance, where she'd just been reborn into a life she'd spent 5 years avoiding. Sophia finished nursing and promptly fell asleep, milk-drunk and content. Emma held her daughter and felt the weight of responsibility settling over both of them. She'd brought a life into the world, and now she had to make sure that world was worth living in. Marcus Chen thought he'd won by discarding her. But he'd actually just freed her to become who she was always meant to be. And that, Emma thought as exhaustion finally claimed her, was going to be his biggest mistake. Emma woke to voices arguing in the hallway outside her room. The sound filtered through her medication-induced fog, sharp, urgent tones that cut through the quiet hum of hospital machinery. Sophia was sleeping in her bassinet, tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm that Emma had already learned to monitor obsessively. She glanced at the clock. 2:47 p.m. She'd slept for nearly 8 hours, her body claiming the rest it desperately needed despite her mind's protests. Someone had left a tray of food on her bedside table, hospital chicken that looked remarkably unappetizing, Jell-O in an unnaturally red shade, and coffee that had long since gone cold. The voices in the hallway grew louder. Emma recognized one of them, Marcus, his tone carrying the sharp edge of barely controlled panic. The other voice was female, younger, with a tremor that suggested tears weren't far behind. You promised me this wouldn't affect my career, the woman said. Vivian, Emma realized. You said the hospital would never find out, that we were being careful. I didn't know my wife owned the fucking hospital, Vivian. Marcus's voice was harsh, stripped of its usual careful professionalism. I didn't know she was worth billions of dollars. How was I supposed to plan for that? So this is my fault? I'm the one who's going to lose my residency, because you didn't do your homework on your wife's background? Emma sat up carefully, wincing as her incisions protested the movement. She should feel satisfaction at hearing them turn on each other, but instead she just felt tired. Tired and oddly detached, as if she were watching a play she'd already seen. The door opened. Rosa entered, carrying fresh ice water, and wearing an expression that suggested she'd heard every word of the hallway argument. Those two have been going at it for 20 minutes, she said, her tone carefully neutral, as she checked Emma's vitals. Security's been called twice already to quiet them down. How's Vivian's baby? Emma asked. Rosa's eyebrows rose slightly, as if she hadn't expected that question. Baby Chen is doing well, considering. 37 weeks is early, but not dangerously so. He's in the NICU for monitoring, but the doctors are optimistic. She paused. You're asking about the other woman's baby. He's Marcus's son, which makes him Sophia's half-brother. Emma looked down at her sleeping daughter. I can hate what Vivian and Marcus did without wanting their child to suffer. You're a better woman than I'd be in your situation. Rosa finished her checks and pulled up Emma's chart on the computer. Your recovery is progressing normally. No excessive bleeding, vitals are stable. Dr. Sullivan wants to keep you one more night for observation, but you should be discharged tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Less than 48 hours since Emma's entire life had imploded and reconstituted itself into something unrecognizable. She'd entered this hospital as Emma Chen, abandoned wife. She'd leave as Emma Sullivan, billionaire heiress. Rosa, Emma said carefully, How much do the staff know about who I am? Rosa's expression turned wry. Honey, this hospital runs on gossip. By noon, every nurse on the maternity ward knew you owned the building. By 2 o'clock, everyone knew about Dr. Chen's affair with Dr. Park. By now, I'd guess the entire hospital is buzzing. She softened slightly. But most people are on your side, if that helps. What he did to you, serving divorce papers in the delivery room, that's the kind of thing that makes people choose sides real quick. Emma absorbed this information. Her privacy was gone, her secrets exposed. But maybe that wasn't entirely bad. Hiding had gotten her nowhere except hurt. A soft knock interrupted them. Karen Wu entered, followed by a woman Emma didn't recognize, late 50s, wearing a white coat, with Dr. Patricia Morrison, Chief of Medicine, embroidered on the breast. Miss Sullivan, Dr. Morrison said, her tone professionally cordial. I hope you're feeling recovered enough for a brief conversation. Of course. Dr. Morrison settled into the visitor's chair with the ease of someone who delivered difficult news in hospital rooms thousands of times. I've been Chief of Medicine at Presbyterian for 12 years. I've known you were the hospital's owner for approximately 9 hours. She smiled slightly. It's been an enlightening morning. I imagine it has. I want to assure you that the ethics investigation into Dr. Chen and Dr. Park will be conducted according to proper protocols. No special treatment. No backdoor favors. We have policies for a reason, and those policies will be followed. Dr. Morrison pulled out a tablet. However, I felt you should be aware of some complications. Emma's stomach clenched. What kind of complications? Dr. Park has filed a formal complaint claiming the investigation is retaliatory. She's arguing that you're using your position as hospital owner to punish her for a personal dispute. Dr. Morrison's expression remained neutral. It's not a strong argument legally, but it does create some public relations challenges. Public relations, Emma repeated slowly. She's the one who had an affair with a married attending physician while she was also married. But I'm the villain in this story? In her version, yes. She's positioning herself as a young female doctor, being victimized by a jealous spouse with unlimited resources. Karen Wu spoke up for the first time. We've already received calls from 2 news outlets wanting to know if it's true that the hospital owner is targeting employees for personal reasons. Emma felt anger flash hot in her chest. She'd been trying to be fair, trying to ensure proper procedures were followed rather than simply using her power to crush them. And now she was being painted as the aggressor. What would you advise? She asked Dr. Morrison. Transparency. We make the ethics investigation completely by the book. We bring in an outside mediator to ensure impartiality. We document every step so thoroughly that no one can claim bias. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. And Miss Sullivan, I need to ask, are you planning to interfere with Dr. Chen's career beyond this investigation? Emma thought about Marcus's face when he'd realized she owned the hospital, the panic that had replaced his earlier arrogance. She thought about the promotion he'd been working toward, the equity stake he'd been counting on. I'm not planning to interfere, she said carefully. But I'm also not planning to approve a promotion for someone who's under ethics investigation. If Dr. Chen is cleared of wrongdoing, he can compete for the position like anyone else. If he's not cleared, then he faces whatever consequences the investigation determines. Dr. Morrison nodded, satisfied. That's exactly the right approach. Fair, defensible, and impossible to characterize as personal vendetta. After they left, Emma picked up her phone and found 17 missed calls, 3 from numbers she didn't recognize, 2 from Marcus, and 12 from a number that turned out to be Vivian Park when Emma finally listened to the voicemails. Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Park. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but we need to talk about this ethics investigation. What Marcus and I did was wrong, but we're both facing career destruction over a private matter. Please call me back. Emma deleted the message without responding. She owed Vivian Park nothing, not conversation, not absolution, not the opportunity to manipulate her way out of consequences. Her phone buzzed with a new text from David Harrison. Board meeting scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m., Sullivan Pharmaceuticals headquarters. They're eager to meet you. Can you attend? Monday. 3 days away. 3 days to recover from childbirth, process her divorce, and somehow transform into the chairman of a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company. She typed back, "I'll be there." Another text came through. This time from James, "How are you feeling? Need anything?" Emma looked around her hospital room, the bassinet where Sophia slept, the monitors tracking her recovery, the window overlooking Manhattan where her father had built his empire. She needed 1,000 things: a plan, a strategy, closure on her marriage, confidence that she could manage a company she'd spent 5 years avoiding. But what she typed was, "I'm okay. Can you come by later? I have questions about the board." James arrived an hour later, carrying takeout from a Thai restaurant Emma recognized from the neighborhood near her apartment. The apartment she'd shared with Marcus. The one she'd have to move out of now. The smell of pad thai made her stomach growl despite the barely touched hospital food on her tray. "You looked like you needed real food," James said, setting up containers on her bedside table. "How are you really feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck. Had the truck reverse over me. And then been asked to run a marathon." Emma accepted the container gratefully. "But physically I'm healing. It's everything else that feels impossible." James pulled up a chair, his own food untouched. "Talk me through it. What feels most impossible right now?" Emma took a bite of pad thai, organizing her thoughts. "Marcus and Vivian are painting me as some vindictive ex-wife using her money to destroy them. The board of Sullivan Pharmaceuticals is expecting me to take over as chairman on Monday, when I've never run a company in my life. I have a 3-day-old baby who needs round-the-clock care. And somewhere in all of this, I'm supposed to figure out who I actually am when I'm not hiding." "Those are all valid concerns," James said. "Let's address them one at a time. First, Marcus and Vivian. You're not being vindictive. You're ensuring hospital policies are enforced. The ethics investigation would have happened regardless of who owned the hospital once their relationship became known. They're trying to control the narrative, but facts matter more than spin. Do they? In public relations battles?" Emma thought about the news outlets calling, the story being written about her whether she participated or not. Eventually, yes. But it helps to get ahead of the story. James pulled out his phone. "I took the liberty of contacting a PR firm that specializes in crisis management. They've handled situations like this before: high-profile divorces, corporate scandals, image rehabilitation. They're willing to take you on as a client." Emma felt the walls closing in slightly. PR firms, crisis management, controlling narratives. This was exactly the kind of attention she'd been avoiding for 5 years. "I know this feels overwhelming," James said gently, reading her expression. "But Emma, you can't control what other people say about you. You can only control your own actions and the story you tell. Right now, Marcus and Vivian are the only ones talking. That gives them power." What would the PR firm advise? Probably a carefully worded statement. Something about focusing on your daughter's well-being and your late father's legacy. Maybe a mention of your commitment to ethical business practices and fair treatment of all hospital employees. James leaned forward. Nothing dramatic, nothing vindictive. Just enough to establish that you're not the villain in their story. Sophia stirred in her bassinet, making small mewing sounds. Emma set down her food and lifted her daughter, the weight of her already feeling more familiar than it had yesterday. "And the board meeting?" she asked, settling Sophia against her chest. "The board is eager but patient. They've been running Sullivan Pharmaceuticals successfully for 3 years without direct family oversight. They don't need you to know everything on day one. They need you to show up, ask intelligent questions, and make it clear you're invested in your father's legacy. I don't know the first thing about running a pharmaceutical company. Your father didn't either when he started. He was a doctor who saw an opportunity to make better drugs more accessible. He built the company through vision and values, not technical expertise." James's expression softened. "Emma, these people knew your father. They loved him. They're not expecting you to be Richard Sullivan." They're expecting you to be his daughter, and everything I've seen in the last 24 hours tells me you're exactly that." Emma looked down at Sophia, who'd fallen back asleep against her shoulder. "What if I fail? What if I'm not smart enough, or strong enough, or—" "You gave birth while being served divorce papers and managed to maintain enough composure to not sign documents that would have screwed you over legally. You're plenty strong." James stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city. "But Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Do you want this?" "Not the money. I know the money is useful, especially now. But the company, the responsibility, the public life that comes with being Richard Sullivan's heir. Do you actually want it, or are you just doing what you think you're supposed to do?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma thought about the 5 years she'd spent hiding, working at the museum gift shop, pretending to be nobody special. She'd told herself it was about finding authentic love. But maybe it had also been about fear. Fear of failing to live up to her father's legacy. Fear of the responsibility that came with billions of dollars. Fear of becoming one of those trust fund heirs who destroyed what previous generations had built. "I don't know," she said finally. 24 hours ago. "I didn't want any of it. I just wanted a normal life with a husband who loved me and a baby we'd raise together. But that's gone now. Marcus destroyed it when he chose Vivian. That's not an answer to my question." Emma closed her eyes, feeling Sophia's warmth against her chest, the steady rhythm of her daughter's breathing. "When I was little, my father used to take me to the research labs. He'd show me the scientists working on new treatments, new drugs that could help people who were suffering. He'd say, 'Emma, we're not here to make money. We're here to make the world a little less painful.' And I believed him. I believed that Sullivan Pharmaceuticals mattered for reasons beyond profit margins." She opened her eyes, looking at James. "I want to believe that again. I want Sophia to grow up knowing her grandfather built something that actually helped people. Not just something that made him rich. So yes, I think I want this. I'm terrified of it, but I want it." James smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Good. Because your father left you more than just money and property. He left you a mission, and I think you're the only person who can carry it forward the way he'd want." A knock interrupted them. Rosa poked her head in, looking apologetic. "Emma, I'm sorry, but Dr. Chen is here again. He's requesting to see the baby. I can tell him to come back later if you're not ready." "No, it's fine." Emma adjusted Sophia in her arms. "He's her father. He should spend time with her." Marcus entered looking haggard in a way that would have worried Emma just yesterday. Now she felt nothing except a distant pity. He'd aged years in the 36 hours since serving her divorce papers, the lines around his eyes deepening with stress and exhaustion. "Thank you for seeing me," he said stiffly. "I know things are complicated. That's one word for it." Emma gestured to the chair James had vacated. "Would you like to hold her?" Marcus approached slowly, as if expecting a trap. When Emma placed Sophia in his arms, something shifted in his expression, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through the careful professional mask he usually wore. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She looks like you. She has your chin." They sat in awkward silence for several minutes, Marcus holding their daughter with surprising gentleness, while Emma watched them both and tried to process the complex tangle of emotions in her chest. Anger at what he'd done, sadness for what they'd lost, and underneath it all, a strange kind of grief for the life they'd never actually had. Because their marriage had been built on lies from the beginning, Emma hiding her identity, and Marcus hiding his affair. "I need to apologize," Marcus said finally, not looking up from Sophia's face. "Not for ending our marriage. I think we both know that was inevitable. But for the way I did it. Serving you with papers in the delivery room was cruel. You deserved better." "Yes, I did. I was panicking. Vivian was in labor, and you were in labor, and I just wanted to have everything settled before both babies arrived. I thought if I could just get you to sign the documents, we could all move forward cleanly." He looked up, meeting Emma's eyes. "I thought I was being practical. I didn't realize I was being a monster." Emma wanted to argue, to tell him that understanding his motivations didn't excuse his actions. But she was too tired for that fight. What do you want, Marcus? I want to be part of Sophia's life. I know I have no right to ask that after what I've done, and I know you have every reason to cut me out completely. But she's my daughter, Emma. Whatever happens between us, I don't want to lose her. I'm not going to keep Sophia from you, Emma said quietly. Despite everything, you're her father. But Marcus, you need to understand something. The custody arrangement you propose shared custody with primary residence alternating weeks, that's not happening. Not now, probably not ever. Marcus's expression tightened. Because you're angry. Because you're unreliable. You served me divorce papers while I was in labor so you could focus on Vivian and your other child. That tells me exactly where Sophia ranks in your priorities. Emma kept her voice steady despite the anger building underneath. I'll agree to reasonable visitation. Every other weekend. Some holidays, supervised until she's older. But Sophia's primary residence will be with me. That's non-negotiable. And if I fight you on that, if I take this to court? Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. Then we'll have a very public custody battle where every detail of your affair comes out. Where the ethics investigation at the hospital becomes evidence of your character. Where Vivian's pregnancy and whether the timing matches up with your claims about when the relationship started gets examined under oath. She leaned forward slightly, holding Marcus's gaze. I have unlimited resources for legal fees, Marcus. I own the hospital where you work. I can make your life very difficult if I choose to. Marcus's gaze. Or we can handle this like adults who share a child and want what's best for her. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Sophia sleeping peacefully in his arms. When did you become so hard? When I had to become a mother while my husband was with his mistress. Emma's voice didn't waver. I'm not hard, Marcus. I'm just done being soft in ways that get me hurt. He handed Sophia back carefully, his movements gentle despite the tension crackling between them. I'll agree to your custody terms. For now. But Emma, this isn't over. No, she agreed. It's just beginning. After Marcus left, Emma sat alone with Sophia and felt the weight of the last 36 hours crash over her like a wave. She'd given birth, inherited billions, confronted her husband, and somehow managed not to completely fall apart. But she was so tired. Tired in her bones, in her soul, in the places that painkillers couldn't touch. Her phone buzzed. A text from David Harrison. PR firm wants to meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. Can send them to the hospital or wait until you're home. Your call. Emma looked at Sophia, thought about the board meeting Monday, about Marcus and Vivian spinning their narrative, about the life she was building from the wreckage of what she'd thought she wanted. She typed back, send them tomorrow. I'm ready to tell my side of the story. Because James was right. She couldn't control what other people said about her, but she could control what she said about herself. And it was time for Emma Sullivan to stop hiding.